September 21st, 1944. Luzon, the Philippines. The air inside the staff tent is heavy enough to choke a man. It smells of stale tobacco smoke, wet canvas, and the cloying sweetness of rotting jungle vegetation. Major General Yoshiharu Iwanaka stands over a sprawling map of the Philippine archipelago, sweat darkening the collar of his tunic. Outside, the incessant drone of cicadas competes with the distant, rhythmic clanking of tracks churning through mud. Iwanaka is the commander of the Japanese 2nd Armored Division, the pride of the Imperial Army in the Pacific. For months, his men have been digging in. They have turned the verdant landscape of Luzon into a fortress of hidden bunkers and spider holes. But today, the general is not looking at infantry positions. He is looking at his armor. To his right, Colonel Shigemi, a man whose reputation for aggression is known all the way back to Tokyo, taps a bamboo cane against the map near the Lingayen Gulf. They are discussing the inevitable American invasion. Intelligence reports from Saipan and Guam have trickled in, speaking of the American M4 Sherman tank. The reports describe a 30-ton beast, heavily armored and mounting a 75mm gun. Shigemi scoffs, a sharp, dismissive sound that cuts through the humid air. He turns to Iwanaka and speaks with the confidence of a man who has never known defeat on the ground. He argues that the Americans are over-reliant on their machines. He claims they are soft, unable to fight without their ice cream and their supply chains. To the officers in this tent, the Sherman is not a predator. It is a lumbering, gas-guzzling liability. They believe the geography of the Philippines is their greatest ally. The rice paddies are deep and treacherous. The jungle tracks are narrow, flanked by soft volcanic soil that swallows heavy machinery whole. In their minds, a 30-ton tank is a fool's errand in this terrain. They look out at their own tanks parked under the camouflage netting of palm fronds. The Type 97 Chi-Ha. It is a medium tank by Japanese standards, weighing in at barely 15 tons. It is nimble, able to scuttle over the soft earth where heavier machines would sink. Recently upgraded with a high-velocity 47mm gun, the Shinhoto Chi-Ha is the pinnacle of their engineering. The officers believe this gun is a giant killer. They have tested it against captured American light tanks, the Stuarts, and watched the rounds punch through steel like paper. They extrapolate this success to the Sherman with dangerous optimism. Iwanaka walks out of the tent and into the blinding sunlight. He watches a platoon of Type 97s maneuvering through a grove of coconut trees. The drivers are skilled, whipping the small tanks around trunks with practiced ease. The crews are veterans, hardened by years of war in China and the early victories across Southeast Asia. They possess Yamato, Damashi, the spirit of old Japan. This, the general believes, is the decisive factor. He watches a young tank commander signal his driver. The hatch clangs shut. The engine roars, a Mitsubishi diesel that rattles the teeth. Iwanaka smiles. He imagines the American tanks, heavy and blind, stumbling into the kill zones his men are preparing. He envisions the Sherman as a slow-moving whale entering a bay filled with sharks. The Japanese doctrine has always emphasized the offensive, the swift strike, the infantryman's bayonet. Tanks are seen merely as support for the foot soldier, mobile pillboxes to clear a path. The idea of a massive armored clash, tank against tank, feels foreign to them. It is a European style of war, not one suited for the tropics. Back inside the tent, an intelligence officer places a new document on the table. It details the American production numbers. Thousands of tanks rolling off assembly lines in Detroit. The numbers are staggering. 50,000 tanks produced in a single year. The officers stare at the paper, but the numbers are too large to fully comprehend. They dismiss it as propaganda. No nation, they reason, could ship that much steel across the largest ocean in the world and keep it running. They mock the reliability of the American equipment. They tell stories of American trucks breaking down, of their reliance on constant maintenance. The Japanese soldier requires only a handful of rice and his rifle. The Japanese tank is simple, rugged, austere. They convince themselves that the American logistical tale is a weakness, a heavy chain that will drag the enemy down once they step onto the muddy shores of Luzon. Night falls over the encampment. The sounds of the jungle grow louder. Under the canopy of stars, thousands of Japanese soldiers sleep, confident in the wisdom of their commanders. They believe the reports that the Sherman is a clumsy ox. They believe their 47mm guns will tear through the American armor. They believe the jungle will fight for them. They do not know that 3,000 miles away, a fleet is gathering. They do not know that the Shermans are not coming in dozens, but in hundreds. And they do not realize that the 47mm shell, which they view as their silver bullet, will bounce off the sloping front armor of a Sherman like a pebble thrown against a wall. The confidence in the camp is absolute. It is the quiet, terrifying calm before the hurricane. January 9th, 1945. Lingayen Gulf, West Luzon. The dawn does not break over the beaches of Luzon. It is shattered. The horizon, usually a calm line where the indigo sea meets the sky, is jagged with the silhouettes of hundreds of warships. Battleships and destroyers unleash a thunderous barrage that turns the shoreline into a churning wall of gray smoke and flying sand. Deep in the observation posts, tucked into the hills overlooking the Gulf, Japanese forward observers press binoculars to their eyes, their hands shaking not from fear, but from the vibration of the ground beneath them. They are waiting for the infantry landing craft, the wooden Higgins boats they have slaughtered before. But as the smoke drifts on the sea breeze, they see something else. The massive jaws of landing ship, tanks, known as LSTs, yawn open directly onto the wet sand. And out of them rolls the nightmare General Iwanaka had dismissed. They do not come in ones or twos. They come in columns. M4 Shermans, painted in olive drab, roar onto the beach, their engines throwing up plumes of blue exhaust. Colonel Shigemi watches from a concealed position several miles inland. He lowers his field glasses, his jaw set tight. The American tanks are not sinking. The intelligence reports promised that the coastal flats were too soft, that the water tables were too high. Yet, he sees the Shermans moving with surprising speed. They are fitted with extended end connectors on their tracks, known as duckbills, which widen their footprint and allow them to float over the mud that was supposed to trap them. The terrain, their greatest ally, has been neutralized by American engineering. The order goes out to the forward elements of the Japanese 2nd Armored Division. Engage and destroy. A platoon of Type 97 Shinhodo-Chiha tanks lies in ambush near a village crossroads on the road to Manila. The commander of the lead Japanese tank, Sergeant Yamato, peers through his periscope. He is a veteran, a man who trusts his machine. He spots the high profile of a Sherman lumbering up the road, its turret traversing slowly, searching for targets. Yamato measures the distance. 500 yards. Perfect range for his high-velocity 47mm gun. He recalls the briefing. Aim for the flat vertical plates. Strike the side. He whispers the order to his gunner. The turret of the Type 97 whirs, the long barrel locking onto the American steel. Fire. The Japanese tank bucks violently. The sharp crack of the cannon echoes through the palms. The crew watches, breath held, expecting to see the Sherman erupt in flames. They see a spark, a flash of light on the Sherman's glacis plate. And then, nothing. The 47mm armor-piercing shell, the pride of the Japanese Armored Corps, strikes the sloping front armor of the Sherman and ricochets harmlessly into the sky. It is a physics problem the Japanese designers had failed to solve. The angle of the Sherman's armor effectively doubles its thickness, and the Japanese shell lacks the kinetic energy to bite through. Inside the Sherman, the crew barely registers the hit as anything more than a sledgehammer ringing a bell. The American commander spots the muzzle flash in the foliage. The turret of the 30-ton monster swings around, far faster than the Japanese anticipated. Sergeant Yamato screams for his driver to reverse, but it is too late. The Sherman's 75mm gun belches fire. The American shell does not bounce. It strikes the Type 97 with the force of a freight train. The Japanese tank is riveted together, not welded, and the impact alone shears the rivets, turning them into lethal shrapnel inside the crew compartment before the explosive filler even detonates. The small tank shudders and dies, black smoke billowing instantly from its hatches. All along the line, similar scenes play out. Japanese anti-tank gunners, hidden in spider holes with towed 37mm and 47mm guns, open fire on the advancing steel wall. They score hits. They see the sparks. But the tanks do not stop. The Shermans simply turn and crush the positions under their tracks or blast them with high explosive shells and canister rounds, which turn the jungle into a shredder. Panic begins to bleed into the Japanese radio network. Reports flood into General Iwanaka's headquarters. Shells bouncing off. Frontal armor impenetrable. Enemy advancing. Iwanaka stares at the map, the same map where he had confidently predicted the failure of American armor. The red markers representing his defensive lines are being erased one by one. He realizes with a cold, sinking dread that the paper tiger is made of hardened steel. The logistical weakness he mocked is nowhere to be seen. The Americans have brought enough fuel and ammunition to level a mountain. But the greatest shock is yet to come. As the sun climbs higher, American recovery vehicles, modified tanks with cranes, appear behind the combat line. Japanese observers watch in disbelief as a Sherman, disabled by a track hit earlier in the morning, is not abandoned. A crew of mechanics in grease-stained coveralls jumps out, shielded by infantry. Within an hour, they have replaced the track links. The engine coughs to life. The tank, which by Japanese standards should have been a total loss requiring shipment back to a factory, turns around and rejoins the fight. The Japanese officers realize they are fighting a hydra. For every tank they manage to damage, the Americans simply fix it or land two more. The mathematics of the war have shifted irrevocably. The jungle fortress is breached, and the sharks are no longer in the bay. They are on the land, and they are hungry. January 24th, 1945. The outskirts of San Manuel, Pangasinan. The sun has dipped below the horizon, but the heat refuses to leave the earth. It radiates upward from the dry rice paddies, carrying the metallic tang of blood and spilled diesel. Major General Iwanaka stands in the command post of the 7th Tank Regiment. The mood is no longer one of arrogant dismissal. It is a tense, vibrating desperation. His most aggressive commander, Colonel Shigemi, is preparing for what the Japanese army does best, the night attack. If the American machines are superior in daylight, commanding the long sight lines with their optics and heavy guns, then the Japanese will strip away that advantage. They will close the distance under the cloak of darkness. They will fight knife to throat. At 0300 hours, the order is given. The engines of 40 remaining Type 97 and Type 95 tanks roar to life. It is the largest concentration of Japanese armor ever assembled for a counterattack in the Pacific War. Shigemi believes that a massed charge, infused with the spirit of self-sacrifice, can shatter the American line. From the American lines, the sound of the approaching armor sounds like a landslide. The United States Army 161st Infantry Regiment, dug in with M4 Shermans of the 716th Tank Battalion, waits. They do not panic. They have star shells. A mortar fires a flare high into the black sky. It bursts with a blinding magnesium white light, drifting slowly under a parachute. The landscape is instantly illuminated in stark, shifting shadows. The Japanese charge is exposed. What follows is not a battle. It is an execution. The American Shermans, hull down behind earth berms, open fire. The muzzle flashes are blinding, strobing the night like an erratic lightning storm. A solid shot from a 75mm gun strikes the lead Type 97. The Japanese tank does not just stop, it disintegrates. The sheer kinetic energy of the American round rips the turret cleanly off the chassis, sending tons of steel cartwheeling into the darkness. Inside the remaining Japanese tanks, the crews are screaming. They fire back, their tracers streaking toward the American positions. But they are shooting at muzzle flashes in the dark. When their shells do hit, the crews hear the sickening sound of ricochets whining off into the night. They push their engines to the red line, trying to close the gap, trying to get to the sides or rear of the Shermans. But the Shermans are not alone. American infantry, armed with bazookas, rise from their foxholes. The bazooka rockets trail sparks as they streak across the paddies, slamming into the thin side armor of the Japanese tanks. The Type 95s, light tanks with armor barely thick enough to stop a heavy machine gun bullet, burst into flames instantly. By dawn, the town of San Manuel is a smoldering ruin. Iwanaka looks out through his binoculars, and his heart turns to ice. It is a graveyard of the Imperial Japanese Army's armored ambition. The hulks of dozens of Japanese tanks litter the field, black and twisted. Smoke columns rise straight up in the still morning air. But what truly breaks the spirit of the officers watching is the sight of the American recovery teams moving in again. They see a Sherman that had been knocked out during the night, its track broken, its hull scarred. A massive M32 recovery vehicle rolls up, winches the damaged tank onto a trailer, and drags it away to be fixed. The Americans are recycling their dead machines, while the Japanese dead stay where they fell. Colonel Shigemi, dusty and exhausted, returns to headquarters. The swagger is gone. The bamboo cane is gone. He looks at Iwanaka and speaks the truth that no one wanted to hear. We cannot fight them tank against tank. The doctrine has failed. The equipment has failed. The dismissal of the Sherman as a clumsy beast was a fatal error that has cost them the flower of their armored core. The realization forces a terrifying evolution in tactics. If the Japanese cannon cannot penetrate the Sherman, then the Japanese soldier must become the cannon. The order comes down from the high command, grim and absolute. One man, one tank. In a supply depot behind the lines, a young infantryman named Private Sato stands in a line with 100 others. He is not issued a rifle. He is not issued a machine gun. A supply officer hands him a bamboo pole, roughly 6 feet long. At the end of the pole is a conical steel warhead, shaped like a funnel. 3 metal prongs stick out from the front. It is a hollow charge anti-tank mine designed to focus an explosion into a narrow jet of molten copper capable of burning through 6 inches of steel. It is called the Shitotsu Bakurai, the lunge mine. The officer explains the operation simply. There is no trigger. There is no timer. Private Sato must run out of his spider hole, charge the American tank, and thrust the 3 prongs into the steel hull. The impact will detonate the charge. Sato looks at the device. He knows, without asking, that the length of the pole is shorter than the blast radius of the explosion. He is not holding a weapon. He is holding his own death warrant. He looks at the officers. They are not looking him in the eye. They are looking at the ground or at the maps. They know that they have run out of steel, and now they must spend blood instead. The arrogance of the early war, the mocking of the soft Americans, has evaporated. In its place is a nihilistic resolve. They will turn the Philippine jungle into a gauntlet of human bombs. They will bury aviation bombs in the roads and detonate them manually. They will strap satchel charges to their chests and dive under the tracks. As night falls again, Private Sato sits in a hole dug beneath the roots of a banyan tree, hugging the bamboo pole to his chest. The ground begins to tremble. The Shermans are coming back. The terrifying squeal of their tracks is louder than the insects now. Sato closes his eyes and waits for the metal monster to pass over him, praying that his fear does not freeze his limbs when the moment comes to die. February 2nd, 1945. Central Luzon Plains. The vibration in the earth reaches a crescendo, rattling the bones of the men hiding in the mud. Under the banyan tree, Private Sato screams a name, perhaps his mother, perhaps the emperor, and surges upward from his spider hole. The Sherman tank, a wall of olive-drab steel, is less than 10 feet away. Sato sprints. The distance is covered in 2 heartbeats. He lunges forward like a spearman of ancient times, driving the 3 metal prongs of the lunge mine into the side of the Sherman's hull, right between the bogey wheels. The world turns white. The explosion is not the sharp crack of a rifle, but a dull, concussive thud that seems to suck the air out of the jungle. A jet of molten copper, moving at hypersonic speed, punches through the steel armor of the tank. The blast wave instantly obliterates Private Sato. He is gone, misted into the humid air, leaving nothing behind but a crater and a twisted bamboo pole. Inside the Sherman, the crew is thrown violently against their restraints. The molten jet sprays into the fighting compartment, searing cables and igniting the hydraulic fluid. Smoke fills the turret. The commander screams to bail out. The hatches fly open and the American crew scrambles out, coughing and choking, diving into the tall grass as the ammunition inside the tank begins to cook off. From the Japanese lines, a cheer goes up. Banzai. They have killed the monster. They have proven that spirit can triumph over machine. But the celebration is short-lived. 20 minutes later, the smoke clears. The Japanese observers peer through the foliage, expecting to see the Americans retreating, shaken by the ferocity of the suicide attack. Instead, they see a bulldozer. It is an armored bulldozer, pushing a mound of earth ahead of it to clear mines. Behind it comes another Sherman, this one moving slowly, its turret traversing with mechanical menace. And behind that tank, walking casually but with rifles at the ready, are squads of American infantrymen. The Americans have adapted. They have learned that the Japanese anti-tank doctrine relies on blindness. So they have given the tank eyes. The infantrymen spot the spider holes. They spot the rustle in the grass. When a Japanese soldier pops up with a satchel charge or a lunge mine, he is not met by a slow traversing turret. He is met by a wall of automatic rifle fire from 20 Marines. General Iwanika reads the casualty reports in a bunker that smells of mildew and defeat. The ratio is horrifying. For every American tank disabled, not destroyed, merely disabled, the Japanese are losing 10, sometimes 20 men. The human bullet tactic is bleeding his division dry. And then there is the logistics. An intelligence officer brings Iwanika a captured American radio. They listen to the chatter. They hear the Americans ordering parts. Not just fuel and ammo, but specific engine components, track links, transmission gears. They order them as casually as a man ordering dinner in a restaurant. And the terrifying part is that the parts arrive. Iwanika walks to the edge of the clearing. He sees the American rear echelon through his high-powered telescope. It looks like a factory city has been dropped into the jungle. He sees tents stretching for miles. He sees mobile machine shops with lathes and welding torches. He sees a damaged Sherman, perhaps the very one hit by the lunge mine earlier, being lifted by a crane. Sparks fly as American welders patch the hole in the hull. They are not scrapping the tank. They are fixing it. They are scrubbing out the blood, rewiring the hydraulics, and painting over the scorch marks. Iwanika realizes that by tomorrow morning, that tank will be killing his men again. He looks at his own supply depot. It is empty. There are no replacement engines for the Type 97. There are no spare tracks. When a Japanese tank breaks a torsion bar, it is abandoned, turned into a static pillbox until it runs out of shells. The Japanese production lines in the homeland are being pounded to dust by B-29 bombers. Even if they could build tanks, the submarines have cut the shipping lanes. There is no steel coming to Luzon. The disparity breaks something inside the general. He had mocked the Americans for their reliance on logistics, calling it a crutch for weak soldiers. Now he sees it for what it is, a weapon more lethal than any cannon. The American logistics system is a necromancer, constantly raising the dead machines to fight again. The Japanese army is fighting a zombie horde of steel that simply refuses to stay dead. Desperation breeds innovation, but of the darkest kind. The orders change again. If they cannot destroy the tanks and they cannot stop the repairs, they must attack the crews. Japanese snipers are told to ignore the infantry and aim for the tank commanders who ride with their heads out of the hatches. In response, the Americans weld improvised armor to their hatches or stack sandbags on the hulls. The Japanese infantry begin to swarm the tanks in suicidal waves, trying to pry the hatches open with bare hands and drop grenades inside. The Americans respond by welding nails and spikes onto the flat surfaces of their tanks, turning them into porcupines of steel so that no enemy can climb aboard. They install back-scratcher systems, personnel mines strapped to the outside of the tank that can be detonated by the crew to kill anyone clustering on the hull. The violence escalates into a primal savagery. The jungle floor is carpeted with the dead. The iconic clash of armor that the Japanese officers had studied in their academies, the grand maneuvers, the flanking strikes, has vanished. It has been replaced by a grinding, industrial slaughter where a 19-year-old boy from Ohio in a 30-ton tank burns a path through the jungle, and a 19-year-old boy from Tokyo dies hugging a landmine to his chest. As the Americans push closer to Manila, the terrain changes. The jungle gives way to paved roads and stone buildings. Iwanika knows that the city will be the final grave. He orders his remaining forces to retreat into the urban sprawl. If the jungle could not stop the Shermans, perhaps the concrete canyons of Manila will. He looks one last time at the American lines. The column of Shermans stretches back to the horizon, an endless conveyor belt of war. He realizes now that the intelligence failure wasn't just about armor thickness or gun caliber. They had underestimated the industrial wrath of a nation that treats tanks like disposable razors, using them, breaking them, and replacing them without a second thought. The jungle war is over. The city war is about to begin. And the Shermans are bringing the fire with them. February 3rd, 1945. The northern outskirts of Manila, The jungle is gone. In its place is a sprawling labyrinth of Spanish colonial architecture, narrow alleyways, and stone churches. General Iwanaca's remaining forces have retreated into the city, turning Manila into a fortress of rubble and desperation. They have barricaded the streets with overturned trams and furniture. They have placed their few surviving Type 97 tanks in the lobbies of banks and the courtyards of schools, burying them in debris until only the muzzles protrude. The Japanese command believes they have finally found the terrain that will stop the American armor. In the open fields, the Sherman reigned supreme. But here, in the tight, choking streets of the capital, they are confident the tanks will be blind, vulnerable to Molotov cocktails and magnetic mines dropped from second-story windows. They believe the paper tiger will find itself in a concrete cage. At dusk, the ground begins to shake. But it is not the rumble of distant artillery. It is the sound of the United States 44th Tank Battalion. Leading the column is a Sherman named Battling Nelson. It does not stop at the roadblocks. It does not wait for infantry to clear the way. It crashes through the iron gates of the Santo Tomas University internment camp, where thousands of starving civilian prisoners are being held. The tank acts as a battering ram, its 30 tons of steel snapping the chains and smashing the barricades as if they were made of balsa wood. Inside the city, the Japanese defenders watch with growing horror. The Americans are not playing by the rules of urban warfare the Japanese studied. When a Sherman encounters a barricaded street, it does not drive down it. It drives through the building next to it. The American commanders have authorized the use of the tanks as mobile demolition crews. The 75mm guns, which the Japanese mocked for their low velocity compared to dedicated anti-tank weapons, are perfect for this work. They fire high explosive shells into the facades of buildings, collapsing entire floors onto the Japanese snipers hiding inside. They blast holes through walls, creating their own doors, allowing the infantry to move from house to house without ever stepping into the lethal open streets. Colonel Shigemi, commanding the remnants of the armored force near the fierce defense of the Paco railway station, watches his strategy crumble. He has positioned his last tanks in perfect ambush spots. As a Sherman rounds a corner, a hidden Type 97 opens fire. The shell strikes the American tank's flank. It penetrates. For a moment, there is a flicker of hope. The Sherman smokes. But then the hatch opens, and the crew bails out, covered by intense machine gun fire from 3 other tanks that instantly saturate the Japanese position. Before the Japanese crew can celebrate their kill, the air is filled with a terrifying, liquid, roaring sound. A new monster has entered the city. It is a Sherman, but the main gun has been modified or replaced. From the barrel spews a stream of napalm, a burning rod of jellied gasoline that reaches out over 100 yards. This is the flamethrower tank. It does not need to aim for the vision slits of the pillboxes. It simply sprays the area. The liquid fire flows like water, seeping through the ventilation grates, trickling into the spider holes, and consuming the oxygen in the bunkers. The Japanese tanks, dug in as static pillboxes, become steel ovens. The crews inside do not die from shrapnel. They die from the heat and the asphyxiation. The psychological terror is absolute. The Bushido spirit, the willingness to die for the emperor, falters in the face of a weapon that burns a man alive before he can even see his enemy. The battle for Manila descends into a grinding, block-by-block annihilation. The Americans possess a supply of ammunition that seems infinite. If a sniper fires a single shot from a bell tower, the Shermans respond by leveling the entire church. They are trading shells for blood, using their industrial might to spare their infantry. General Iwanaca, cut off from his units, listens to the reports dying out one by one. The 2nd Armored Division, the force that was supposed to sweep the Americans back into the sea, effectively ceases to exist. There are no maneuvers left. There is no retreat. There is only the deafening roar of the American engines and the crumbling of stone. In the Intramuros, the ancient walled city at the heart of Manila, the Japanese make their final stand. The walls are thick, built centuries ago to withstand cannon fire. But the Americans bring up the M7 Priests, self-propelled 105mm howitzers on tank chassis, and fire point blank into the stone until it breaches. Then the Shermans pour through. The Japanese officers who once laughed at the American tank crews now look at the blackened, ruinous landscape of Manila and realize the magnitude of their mistake. They had prepared for a war of courage and bayonets. They were met with a war of machines and mathematics. The Sherman was not just a tank. It was the tip of a spear with the weight of the entire American industrial complex behind it. By early March, the silence returns to Manila. It is the silence of a graveyard. The city is flattened. The Japanese 2nd Armored Division is buried beneath it. The few surviving officers, stripped of their tanks, their pride, and their illusions, retreat into the mountains or choose ritual suicide. They leave behind the twisted wrecks of their Chiha tanks, looking like toys broken by a careless giant, resting in the shadow of the victorious, idling Shermans. August 15th, 1945. A prisoner of war holding area, Luzon. The guns are finally silent. The Emperor's voice has crackled over the radio, announcing the unthinkable: surrender. In a dusty enclosure surrounded by barbed wire, the surviving officers of the Japanese 2nd Armored Division sit in silence. They are gaunt, their uniforms tattered, stripped of their swords and their rank. Among them sits a former battalion commander. He watches through the wire as a convoy of American vehicles rumbles past on the main road. It is not a combat column. It is a victory parade of logistics. Trucks, jeeps, bulldozers, and yes, the M4 Shermans. They pass by for hours, a river of steel that seems to have no source and no end. An American intelligence officer, a lieutenant with a clipboard, enters the enclosure. He is conducting post-combat interviews. He approaches the Japanese commander and asks a simple question through an interpreter. What weapon did you fear the most? The Japanese officer does not say the atomic bomb. He does not say the B-29 bomber or the P-51 Mustang. He points a shaking finger toward the road at the olive-drab silhouette of a Sherman tank idling near the gate. That, he says softly, because there were always more of them. The full scope of their miscalculation has settled upon them like a shroud. In 1944, they had looked at the specifications of the Sherman and laughed. They compared it to their idealized vision of armored warfare and found it wanting. They mocked its height, its suspension, its gasoline engine. They called it a toy for soft soldiers, but they had failed to understand the philosophy behind the machine. The Americans did not build a tank to duel with other tanks in a vacuum. They built a tank to win a global war. They built a machine that could be shipped across an ocean, unloaded on a beach, driven through a jungle, repaired by a farm boy with a wrench, and fight for 3,000 miles without stopping. The Japanese emphasized individual excellence and the spirit of the warrior. They built delicate, precise machines that required expert hands. When those machines broke, or when those experts died, they had nothing left. The Americans emphasized reliability and interchangeability. When a Sherman crew was killed, another crew took their place. When a tank was hit, it was salvaged. The paper tiger had turned out to be a beast of burden, that simply outworked the Empire. The documentary camera pans over a scrapyard in Manila. We see the rusted skeletal remains of a Type 97 Chi-Ha. Its thin armor is perforated like Swiss cheese. It sits alone, a relic of a doctrine that believed willpower could alter the laws of physics. Next to it, in stark contrast, is a grainy archival film clip. It shows a factory in Detroit. The assembly line is moving fast. Sparks fly. Tremendous presses stamp out turret rings. Workers bolt tracks onto hulls. Every 20 minutes, a new Sherman rolls off the line. It is a visual representation of the tsunami that drowned the Japanese military. The narrator's voice drops to a somber tone. The Japanese officers in the Philippines learned the hardest lesson of the 20th century. They learned that in modern war, bravery is not enough. They learned that dismissing an enemy because they rely on logistics is not wisdom. It is suicide. The Sherman was not the most powerful tank of the war. It did not have the thickest armor or the biggest gun. But on the islands of the Pacific, facing an enemy who had underestimated it at every turn, it was the perfect weapon. It was the anvil against which the Imperial Japanese Army was broken. The final shot is of a lone Sherman tank, restored and sitting on a pedestal in a quiet park in the Philippines today. Children play around it, unaware of the fury it once unleashed. The jungle has grown back, covering the scars on the land. But the lesson remains etched in history, a testament to the moment when the samurai spirit met the American assembly line and realized, too late, that the machine always wins.